Hi, I'm Kaylin. At my husband's funeral, right beside his casket, his mother leaned in and whispered, "You'll be out of this house in a week." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just walked away. Silent. But what she didn't know? He left me a letter. And when I opened it, everything changed. Before we begin, what time are you listening? And where from? Drop a comment, because if you've ever been pushed aside while grieving, you'll feel every word of this. I didn't cry. Not when the priest said his final words. Not when the lid of the casket lowered like a quiet judgment. Not when I saw his brother standing by the flowers, pretending like he ever knew the man inside that box. I just stood there, still, silent. I couldn't even feel my own legs beneath me. My heels sank slightly into the grass, but I didn't move. It was like I had become a statue made of something too soft to be strong and too tired to crumble. People kept their distance. I wasn't sure if it was pity or politeness. Maybe both. No one came to hug me. No one took my hand. They whispered, nodded, then stepped around me like I was an inconvenience. I used to be the wife. Now I was something else, something undefined. Verlaine stood only a few feet away. She didn't look at me, not directly. She stood tall, hands folded in front of her like she was at a charity gala, not her own son's funeral. Her lips were pursed, unmoved, her chin slightly lifted. Mourning wasn't in her vocabulary. Control was. The sun began to dip lower, throwing long shadows across the grass. That's when the last guest, some old co-worker of my husband's I didn't recognize, murmured a goodbye and walked away. Only a few of us were left. Verlaine turned. Her heels crunched softly on the gravel. Then she stepped closer. For a moment I thought, maybe she'd say something human, but she didn't. She leaned in, voice smooth and cutting. "You'll be out of the house in a week. I've already spoken to the attorney." I stared at the casket, still closed beside me. Not even the dirt had touched it yet. I didn't speak. What could I say that wouldn't dissolve me into tears in front of her? I just nodded, once, and turned away. The brooch in my palm, the one he gave me last year, pressed into my skin. I hadn't worn it today. I couldn't. I didn't even know why I brought it. I walked away with my back straight. No one followed. By the time I got back to the house, the golden light of afternoon had faded into something grayer. I let myself in, expecting silence. But there was sound, the soft hum of a suitcase zipper. Her suitcase. Verlaine's. Sitting proud on the guest room bed like it belonged there. I moved down the hall to the bedroom. The master bedroom. Ours. His side of the closet was empty. Not just thinned out. Empty. His cologne, his slippers, the stack of books he never finished, all gone, even his favorite flannel shirt. Vanished. I opened a drawer. It screeched, hollow. The smell of cedar hit me like a wave of something old and familiar and painfully out of place. I tried the office next. The doorknob resisted. I frowned, twisted harder. Click. Nothing. She'd changed the lock. I didn't scream. I didn't even curse. I just stood there for a long while before finally retreating to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the mattress, the side that was still mine. My hand found the photo on the nightstand, us, from our last anniversary dinner. He had this goofy smile. I remember teasing him about the cake on his chin. I almost smiled now. Almost. The brooch was still in my coat pocket, turquoise and silver, a little worn at the edges. "You wear this," he'd whispered once, fastening it gently on my collar, "and you're never invisible. Not to me." That memory came in sharper than the present. I closed my fingers around it. For a moment, I thought about pinning it on my blouse. Then I stopped. Instead, I wrapped it gently in tissue and slid it back into my coat pocket, like pressing it back into time. That night, I barely slept. At dawn, the house creaked with the cold shift of early autumn. I got up, folded my pajamas slowly, made the bed. Then I pulled out the suitcases. I didn't wait for Verlaine to say anything. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. I ignored her. My hands moved on their own, shirt, book, toothbrush. My life, reduced to a few zippers and tired fabric. I walked to his side table, not sure why. Habit, maybe. There was still one book left, something he had half read. I picked it up, and that's when I heard it. A faint thump, like something shifting inside. I turned the book over. Taped underneath, a white envelope. No name, no markings, just there. I didn't open it, not yet. My heart pounded, but my fingers stayed still. I slid it into my bag, zipped the front pocket. My breath was shallow, like I'd stolen something. Then I turned. At the front door, I paused. Verlaine spoke once more, her voice low, satisfied. He made his choice. You were never part of this family. I didn't flinch. I didn't even look back. I walked out with my bag, my coat, and the brooch in my pocket. Alone. But that letter whispered to me before I ever opened it. I didn't sleep the night I left. Not really. The rented studio in Laurel was small, too quiet, and smelled faintly of old linoleum and lemon cleaning spray. I stared at the ceiling until dawn crept through the blinds, my fingers unconsciously brushing the edge of my coat pocket where the letter stayed untouched. For 3 days, I couldn't bring myself to read it. I moved it from coat to purse to nightstand, but I never broke the seal. Until tonight. It was nearly 7 p.m. when I sat down cross-legged on the carpeted floor, back against the foot of the pull-out couch. The apartment buzzed faintly with the hum of the fridge and the traffic outside. My phone screen sat dark beside me. No calls, no messages. Just me and the envelope. Off-white, hand-addressed in his familiar looping script. I didn't open it gently. I couldn't. My fingers trembled too much. The paper tore, and the letter slipped out, folded twice, with something stiff tucked behind it. I unfolded the pages and stared. His handwriting. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I saw him, my husband, Arlen, on a Sunday morning, hunched at the kitchen counter with a pen in hand and glasses sliding down his nose. He always wrote in pen, always in blue ink. Neat, steady lines. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I read that line twice, then again, and again. I bit the inside of my cheek until it stung. I know exactly who'll try to erase you. My fingers curled around the paper. His words weren't flowery or poetic. They were direct, like he knew time was running out. He wrote about Verlaine, how she'd become more controlling in the months leading up to his diagnosis, how she'd repositioned the family narrative and isolated him slowly, emotionally, then physically. He said he saw it too late, but once he did, he acted. I changed the will. You just have to know where to look. That sentence glowed on the page like it had been etched in light. I whispered it aloud, barely a breath. Then he gave me a name. Randall Hines. Attorney. He keeps the real file. I lowered the letter to my lap. The stiffness tucked behind it turned out to be a business card. Plain, no logo, just a name, a number, and an address in Annapolis. I flipped it over. In Arlen's handwriting, he's the only one who didn't fold. I sat there staring while the street lamps outside flickered on. A memory surfaced, something small. Months ago, I asked Arlen why he never locked the guest room, but always locked the office. He just smiled and said, "That drawer has more power than people think." He never told me what was inside, but I remembered the floorboard. Under the bookshelf in the far corner, one he'd shown me how to loosen when we first moved in. Back then, we joked about hiding our secrets there, like kids. Now it didn't feel like a joke. I couldn't go back to the house. Verlaine would never let me in, and even if she did, I doubted that drawer was still untouched. Still, something inside me stirred. The kind of slow, growing determination that starts at the base of your spine and crawls upward. I stood and crossed the room, the letter still in my hand. I picked up my phone, dialed the number on the card and held it to my ear. Voicemail. A short, clipped tone. I tried to steady my voice as I spoke. "My name is Kaylin Dorrance. I believe Arlen left something with you. He told me to say, 'The canoe's on the water.'" I ended the call and stared at the screen. Nothing. An hour passed. Then 2. I reheated leftover soup I barely touched. I paced. I reread the letter, and then I noticed it. There was something drawn on the back, not just a sketch, almost a map, a simple box labeled First Mariner, arrows pointing to a set of coordinates, and a final message written in small, careful script. I couldn't stop them in time, but you can. Start here. I lowered the paper slowly. My breath caught. A safe deposit box? I looked across the room at the bag I had barely unpacked. My coat still lay on the back of the chair, brooch inside the pocket, wrapped in tissue. I crossed the room, slipped the letter back into its envelope, and folded it into the inside pocket of my bag. My fingers lingered on the fabric. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the narrow window toward the street. Red brake lights glowed below, blinking, then disappearing into the night. Arlen had left me breadcrumbs, and after days of grief, something new stirred inside me. I didn't know if it was hope yet. Maybe it was just resistance. But I would follow every trail he left. I didn't sleep much that night. My body was in the bed, but my mind had already crossed the street to First Mariner Bank. By the time the morning light pushed through the blinds of my little rental, I'd memorized the letter twice over. I packed my purse with the photo from our wedding, my ID, and that single piece of paper that had become my anchor. I left early, earlier than needed. Just walking gave me something to focus on besides the drumbeat of nerves in my chest. My shoes clicked softly against the sidewalk, and for once I didn't mind the noise. It was something real, something I could control. Inside the bank, the air smelled like polish and coffee. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat. I approached the reception desk and asked for Miles, the name scribbled in the margin of the letter. A man in his 50s, in a neat gray suit, stepped out from the hallway a few minutes later. His hair was thinning, his face lined with the kind of care that doesn't come from family, but from secrets. When I gave him my name and told him who I was, who I had been, his posture shifted, not rudely, not coldly, but like someone suddenly standing on eggshells. I leaned in slightly and said, "The canoe's on the water." His lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then he gave a tight nod and motioned for me to follow. We walked past the teller windows, past cubicles and into a small private office that smelled faintly of leather and thyme. He shut the door behind us and turned to me. He told me if you ever came here with that phrase, I was to give you this. And only you. No exceptions. Not even his mother. He opened a drawer behind his desk and pulled out a sealed gray box and a thick folder with a red ribbon tied around it. My hand shook a little as I reached for them. "Do you mind if I asked. "It's yours now," he said simply. I untied the ribbon and opened the folder first. There it was, a notarized will, dated exactly 2 weeks before he died. I scanned it, blinking hard as the words clarified in my brain. The house, the entire estate, his insurance, every last bit of it left to me. There was a note in my husband's handwriting paperclip to the front. "Verlaine doesn't know about this one. She was never meant to." My chest tightened. I had sat across from that woman at the funeral, listened to her talk about family legacy and keeping what's his in the right hands, while this document was waiting for me in a locked drawer. Miles cleared his throat gently. "He asked me to tell you something in case you wondered. The original will was supposed to be delivered by a third-party courier, scheduled to arrive after the funeral, but..." He clicked a button on his desktop and a grainy video began to play. A security cam feed, the bank's lobby. A woman in a black veil, Verlaine, stepped up to the counter and presented ID. It bore my husband's name. She signed a form, then took an envelope from the employee behind the glass. I watched her walk away with it, calm and poised. Not mourning, executing. "She had a forged credential," Miles explained. "We didn't realize until too late. He suspected something might happen. That's why he left a backup with us. Quietly. He was careful." I couldn't speak. My jaw locked so tight it ached. Verlaine didn't just disrespect me at the funeral, she didn't just lock me out of the home I'd helped decorate and live in. She tried to erase me. Erase our marriage. Erase the truth. This wasn't grief, this was strategy. I turned to Miles. "Can I get a certified copy of the will today?" "Yes, and I'll have a legal affidavit prepared. You'll want it on hand." He was calm, professional, but I saw it, the sympathy beneath his eyes. Maybe he had a wife. Maybe he'd watched someone go through something like this before. Or maybe he just knew what it felt like to see your whole world rewritten by someone else's lies. When I walked out of that bank an hour later, my hands were full. The will, the affidavit, a flash drive with the security footage, and a slim red folder labeled Emergency Legal Instructions. But more than that, I carried something else. For the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel small or helpless or crazy. He had believed in me. He had prepared for this, anticipated it. That woman, Verlaine, could control who walked in and out of that house, but she couldn't control the truth. Not anymore. He hadn't just left me love. He'd left me a weapon. That night, I stood across the street from the house Verlaine swore I'd never enter again. It was already dark when I parked across the street from the house. My house. Or at least it had been. Now I sat in my car, engine off, hands gripping the wheel, watching through the windshield like a stranger peering into someone else's life. Inside, the lights were warm. Too warm. Laughter spilled through the half-open windows, echoing off the porch like it belonged in some magazine ad for a perfect life. The table I helped pick out from a reclaimed barn in Pennsylvania was now dressed in fresh linen. The chandelier, which had hung dim during my husband's final weeks, sparkled as if grief had never visited this place. Verlaine stood near the entryway, drink in hand, surrounded by people she'd probably labeled as dear friends. I recognized a few, a couple from church, a woman from her charity board, the neighbor who once brought over burnt brownies as an apology for her dog tearing through our garden. I stayed in the shadows, clutching the file in my lap like armor. A moment later, I saw it. The door had been rekeyed, and the keypad lock was new. The garden lights blinked in sync with a motion detector, one I knew hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. She wasn't mourning. She was securing territory. My phone buzzed. I picked it up quickly, half expecting another cruel message. Instead, it was the number I'd saved under Legal Blake. I answered with a quiet, "Yes?" Adina Blake's voice was composed, clipped, and unmistakably calm. "Ms. Greer, I've confirmed everything. The emergency will is legally sound, notarized, signed, and filed with a third-party fiduciary. The footage you sent, Verlaine impersonating your husband to retrieve the prior documents, will be critical." I exhaled but didn't relax. What happens now? "I've already filed an emergency injunction. You'll be notified when the hearing is set. Likely Friday morning. I suggest you don't make direct contact until the documents are served. Let the law speak for you." As she hung up, I stared again at the front porch. The porch where my husband once carved our initials into the bottom stair, whispering, "Now it's ours." The same porch where, days ago, his mother looked me in the eye and said, "You'll be gone in a week." She meant it. Earlier that day, right before heading to the bank, I'd received a certified letter. It was from Verlaine's attorney, filed under her name alone, requesting legal removal of a temporary occupant from the premises. She'd labeled me that. A temporary occupant. The paperwork claimed my husband had died without a will and that I had no rightful place in the home. She'd attached a falsified affidavit, one that conveniently left out our marriage license, and even suggested we were in the process of separating. Her filing date? The morning after the funeral, less than 24 hours after we'd buried him. I remembered the nausea, the sheer disbelief, and the one document I kept rereading in the glove box, my husband's letter. If she tries to take the house, let her. Then walk into court with the truth. I've seen what she does to people when no one's looking. You're not her. That's your power. I must have read that paragraph 20 times since the morning. It didn't stop the rage, but it turned it into something sharper, controlled. I opened the car door and stepped out, heels crunching softly against the gravel. Across the street, laughter rose again. I didn't flinch. I walked, slow and steady, past the mailbox Verlaine had already repainted. I took the front path, the one bordered by lavender bushes I'd planted 5 years ago. Verlaine stood on the porch as I reached the gate. Her laugh froze the moment she saw me. I watched her expression melt into something between disdain and smug amusement. "Well?" she called out, her voice loud enough for the guests to hear. "I thought you finally understood. You don't belong here." I didn't blink. "I'm not here to argue," I said calmly. "I'm just here to serve you. Court papers." From behind me, a courier emerged from a dark sedan. He stepped up beside me, removed a thick, sealed envelope from his satchel, and held it out. Verlaine's smirk slipped as she took the packet. She tore it open too fast, impatient, confident, and then her face dropped like a stone. Whatever words were on the page, they cut deeper than she expected. Her fingers trembled. "What is this?" "You might want to read the part about impersonating a deceased individual to obtain legal documents," I said softly. Gasps from behind her. Someone whispered, "Wait, is that the wife?" But I didn't stay to hear more. I turned, walked back to my car, and let her voice follow me, shouting, shrill, furious, "Kaylin, you think this changes anything? You think people are going to believe you?" I didn't answer. I let the silence carry more weight than any comeback could. Back in the car, I watched the file rest in the passenger seat, the one marked Emergency Legal Instructions. My grip on the wheel loosened slightly. It was going to be a long week, but I was ready. The first hearing was set for Friday, and I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was reclaiming what was mine. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper, lemon cleaner, and tension. My boots clicked steadily down the hallway as I followed Adina toward courtroom 3B. The letter my husband left me felt heavier in my purse today than it did the night I read it in my car. I kept his words close, like armor. Inside the courtroom, people murmured in low tones. Verlaine hadn't arrived yet, but her lawyer, Myron Tate, was already seated at the long table across from us, arranging his briefcase like it was a showpiece. He wore a smug expression that said he was used to winning. Adina leaned in. "Just remember, truth doesn't need to shout. Let them do the theatrics." I nodded, though my throat was dry. I hadn't slept much, and the coffee I sipped on the way here had only added a restless hum to my nerves. But I was ready. And then, Verlaine entered. It was like watching a Broadway audition. Dressed in full black from head to toe, with a lace veil that screamed melodrama, she floated in slowly, dabbing at imaginary tears beneath her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. You'd have thought she was the widow. Her friends followed in solemn silence, like she was leading a funeral procession rather than a probate hearing. She passed me deliberately and gave the faintest nod, lips pinched like she tasted something sour. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Once seated, she clung to the sleeve of Myron Tate like he was her lifeline. He stood and announced loudly, "Your Honor, we are here to assert the rights of Verlaine Darrow, the mother of the deceased, as next of kin and rightful heir of the Laurel estate, due to the estranged relationship between the decedent and his alleged spouse." Alleged. My fingers curled against the table. Adina reached over and gently tapped the back of my hand, just once, grounding me. Judge Carla Nguyen raised a brow. She didn't say anything at first, just glanced over the paperwork, flipping page by page with deliberate patience. She finally asked, "Mr. Tate, could you clarify when the eviction notice against Ms. Darrow was filed?" Tate replied with a carefully crafted smile. "The day after the memorial, Your Honor, as a necessary measure, given the lack of legal tenancy. And this notary's signature here," the judge continued, tapping one of the papers, "it looks inconsistent with the original sample on file." Verlaine shifted slightly. Tate barely blinked. "Probably a clerical oversight, Your Honor. Certainly not intentional." The judge's eyes lingered a moment longer before she turned to us. "Ms. Blake?" Adina stood. Her calm presence filled the room without needing drama. Your Honor, we'd like to submit several items for the court's consideration. First, a copy of my notarized marriage license, then the emergency will, digitally time-stamped, then the footage of Verlaine impersonating me at the post office to intercept documents. The screen flickered to life as we all turned, but the final video silenced everything. My husband sat in a hospital bed, his voice hoarse but clear. I know my mother will try to contest this. Kaylin, this is your home, our home. I trust you with what we built. You stood by me when no one else did, not her. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the room exhaled. Verlaine's friends sat stiff as statues. Her lawyer didn't say a word. The judge tilted her head slightly and asked, "Would you like to request a recess?" Tate cleared his throat. "Actually, yes, if—" "Denied," the judge cut in flatly. "We continue." The courtroom held its breath. Then Verlaine stood up abruptly, veil tossed back. "She manipulated him. My son was sick. He didn't know what he was saying. She was never part of this family. Never." There it was. The mask slipped. Gasps erupted in the gallery. One of her friends turned and stared at her like she didn't recognize the woman beside her. Judge Nguyen's gavel cracked like thunder. "That is enough, Ms. Darrow. This is a court of law, not a stage." Verlaine sat down hard, but her face was red, her hands trembling. Adina rose again. "Given the evidence, we respectfully request a temporary injunction granting my client possession of the home and a no-contact order pending further proceedings." There was no debate, no more theatrics, just the quiet sound of the judge writing something in her notes. She looked up and spoke clearly, her voice echoing in the now silent room. "The request is granted. Ms. Kaylin Darrow is hereby awarded temporary control of the estate and all associated assets. Ms. Verlaine Darrow is ordered to remain no less than 300 feet away from the residence and to cease any direct or indirect contact until further ruling." Verlaine let out a strangled laugh. "So this is what it's come to? You'll regret this. You think you've won?" "Verlaine," the judge warned, "one more word and I'll hold you in contempt." She fell silent. Adina gently gathered our documents. I stood, legs steady now. The gavel came down once more, final. We stepped outside into the sunlight. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel cold. I returned to the house that night, but nothing could prepare me for what I found inside. The key turned smoothly in the front door, but the moment I stepped into the foyer, it felt like I had broken into a place I no longer belonged. The courtroom had given me temporary legal rights, but the air in the house hadn't gotten the memo. It was still heavy with Verlaine's perfume and untouched silence. The couch cushions were fluffed, just like he preferred. His reading glasses rested beside the armrest like he'd be back any second to pick them up. But he wasn't coming back. I didn't turn on the lights right away. Instead, I walked slowly through the house, letting my fingertips brush the wall, the edge of a chair, the wood grain of the hallway table. It was like trying to remember a language I hadn't spoken in years, familiar but fragile. His office door was shut. Always had been. He liked to work in quiet, and I'd respected that. But that night, I opened it without hesitation. Inside, the space was as neat as ever, almost too neat. A few books stacked by theme, the leather chair slightly turned to the side, his old fountain pen still uncapped on the desk. But something was off. I felt it in my ribs. I walked over to the desk. The top drawers opened easily, mostly pens, sticky notes, a few legal pads filled with his nearly illegible handwriting. But the bottom right drawer didn't budge. Locked. That was strange. He rarely locked anything. I checked the digital access panel on the filing cabinet beside it. My name used to be one of the authorized users. Now? Access denied. A small, bitter laugh escaped my lips. Of course, Verlaine had been here. She'd erased me, but she hadn't known everything. I crouched down, pulled back the small floor mat under the desk, and reached beneath the paneling. Years ago, he'd taught me how to reset the panel in case of emergencies, or in case your mother-in-law goes off the rails. He'd joked once with a smile that still burned in my memory. I popped open the reset cover and keyed in the old override code, Our anniversary in reverse. The light blinked green. Click. The drawer opened with a low creak. Inside was a single sealed envelope, cream-colored, thick, aged slightly at the edges. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. Just 5 words underneath it. Only open if they come. My legs gave way and I sat back on the carpet, the envelope clutched in my hands. I stared at it for a long time before I dared break the seal. My fingers trembled. Not from fear, but from something deeper. Reverence, maybe. Grief, maybe. A flicker of hope. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten document, dated 1 week before the official will. This one was different. It didn't just leave me the house and the assets. It granted me sole rights to his personal writings, his journals, and something else I didn't know existed. A memoir. A full manuscript. He'd finished it without telling me. At the bottom of the will, scrawled in ink that looked rushed but certain, were the words, "I couldn't protect you while I was alive. I hope this gives you the strength when I can't." I held the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. I didn't cry. Not this time. There was too much still to uncover. Inside the same drawer was a small USB drive. The label read, "Family, Truth, and the Rest." I slid it into my laptop. There were folders, audio recordings, date-stamped, organized. I clicked the first. His voice filled the room, steady, clear. "Verlaine, I know what you've done," he said. "I saw the withdrawals. Don't insult me." She responded, faint, dismissive. "You're confused. You've been on meds. You're not thinking straight." "No," he said. "I'm more clear than ever." In another recording, he spoke to someone else, his lawyer maybe. He mentioned a private bank account opened in my name. "Just in case she goes after her," he said. "This way, Kaylin has something they can't touch." I covered my mouth, trying to steady my breath. He had seen the storm coming, and he'd prepared. Quietly, deliberately. Back at the desk, I opened a small side drawer and found a flash drive labeled Manuscript. Inside were chapters of his memoir, painfully honest accounts of his relationship with his mother, his regrets, his fears, and me, so much of me. His voice threaded through every word. "I was a coward sometimes," he wrote in one chapter, "but Kaylin wasn't. She stood up even when I couldn't." I leaned back in the chair. My fingers traced the keys, but I didn't type. I just sat there, letting the truth settle. When I stood, it was slow, measured. I folded the envelope, wrapped it carefully in the ivory handkerchief I had tucked away for years, the same one I'd carried down the aisle when we married. I placed it gently inside my safe. Then I lit a single candle, set it by the window, and whispered, "Thank you." I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to finish what he started. The air felt different now. Less like a battlefield, more like the first quiet hour after war. I picked up the phone. "Adina," I said when she answered, "I need you to look into a set of financial records. There's something bigger going on." By the time I stepped through the revolving door of the bank Monday morning, I'd rehearsed every word in my head at least a dozen times. Still, my palms were damp, and my heartbeat pulsed hard against my scarf. The folder in my arms felt heavier than it should have. Documents, the USB drive, the letter with his signature. But it also carried something else. The weight of every night I'd spent not knowing what he'd left behind for me. The receptionist led me to a glass-walled office tucked near the back. Inside waited a woman in her late 50s, hair neatly pinned, her navy blue blazer sharp, but her eyes kind. She stood and extended a hand. "Ms. Arliss," she said, "senior investigator, you must be Kaylin." I nodded, and we shook hands. Her grip was firm. I liked that. Once we were seated, I didn't waste time. I slid the envelope across the table, along with the printed will and the small flash drive I'd labeled in permanent marker. "James, final recordings." She looked at me steadily. "May I?" "Please," I said quietly. She took her time, reviewing the documents, listening through a pair of earbuds, while I sat across from her, hands locked together in my lap. My eyes kept drifting to the muted sunlight behind her, casting long shadows across the carpet. Halfway through the first recording, her expression changed, just the subtlest flicker of her brow. She unplugged the earbuds and clicked to the second file. "Your husband recorded this 2 months before he passed," she finally said. "This is clear, and it's time-stamped. His mental clarity seems intact. This is admissible in a fraud investigation." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My grip on the folder loosened. She continued, "And this letter, this line, only open if they come for you. That's not just sentiment, that's protection." I felt my throat tighten. "He knew." Ms. Arliss nodded slowly. "He did." She turned to her computer and began typing, her fingers gliding across the keyboard with practiced ease. "Let's track the trail." I watched her navigate internal banking systems I didn't understand, but when she turned the screen slightly toward me, I understood the numbers. Withdrawal, transfer, cash, donation to a Community Relief Alliance, a name I'd never heard. Another withdrawal from that same charity account, routed to a personal account under the name Verlaine Cassell, over and over, $138,000, stolen. "He was in palliative care when this began," Ms. Arliss murmured, scrolling. She used his illness as her window. My hands curled into fists on my lap. The feeling wasn't rage this time. It was quieter, more settled, like a thread pulling tight. I wasn't shocked anymore. I was ready. "There's more," Arliss added, shifting to a different tab. "He opened another account, in your name, 3 years ago, funded it monthly in equal increments from a silent trust. We see this sometimes. Preemptive protection. Quiet but deliberate." She printed the final page and slid it to me. "Current balance, $361,725.91. My vision blurred. I blinked it back. "He planned for me to be okay," I whispered. "Even when he knew they'd try to cut me out." Arliss said gently, "He didn't just leave you money, Ms. Kalin. He left you a map." I took a few moments. Then I asked the question I came prepared for. "Can we freeze her access?" She leaned back, thoughtful. "Temporarily, yes. With the will and these recordings, we have cause. I'll submit a report to our legal department to trigger a provisional freeze on her personal accounts and the charity one. You'll need a probate attorney, preferably one who understands elder abuse and exploitation. I can recommend someone." I nodded, standing. My legs were heavier, but my steps were steadier. "Thank you," I said, collecting the folder and documents she handed me in a protective envelope. She looked at me before I left. "You've got more strength than most who walk through that door, Kalin. Keep going." Outside, the sun had shifted overhead. Traffic hummed on the street. I walked to my car and sat for a moment, staring at the wheel. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was focused. That evening, as dusk softened the windows of my living room, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in days. Verlaine. I didn't answer. I didn't even reach for the phone. I just let it ring, once, twice, 5 times, then silence. And it felt good, not petty, not cruel, just solid. Later that night, after dinner and a long shower, I returned to James's journal. It still sat where I'd left it on the bookshelf, its spine worn from years of use. I opened it and flipped through pages of familiar handwriting, ink-stained thoughts, and dreams we once spoke aloud. Then I found it, a page marked with a pressed petal from the gardenia bush in our old backyard. It had browned at the edges, fragile as memory. And just above it, his words. "They'll come for what they think is theirs. But I hope she knows now. What's hers was never theirs to take." I placed my palm over the page and whispered, "I know now." And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. The courtroom was quiet. Too quiet. Only the sound of heels clicking against the polished wood broke the stillness as people found their seats. I stepped forward, clutching my file with both hands, not out of fear, but to keep them from trembling. The courtroom wasn't packed, but the silence felt heavy, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Verlaine was already seated on the opposite bench, wearing black again like she was in mourning. For what? I didn't know. Maybe for the control she thought she still had. Her attorney, a stiff man in a gray suit with an impatient look, leaned over to whisper something in her ear. She nodded curtly, avoiding eye contact with me. I sat beside my attorney, Linda Hefner, a woman in her 50s, firm-voiced with soft eyes that could turn sharp like broken glass when needed. She gave me a subtle nod, and I exhaled slowly. The judge entered and called the court to order. He was tall, lean, and had that air of no-nonsense I'd only ever seen in my high school principal and my late husband when he was focused. This hearing will determine the initial validity of the contested will, specifically on the grounds of intent, capacity, and undue influence, he said, reading from his notes. We'll proceed with the petitioner's evidentiary submission. Linda stood. Your Honor, we request to admit audio and written documentation from Mr. Brent Hawthorne as evidence of testamentary intent, along with supporting documents confirming the existence of a private trust and his concerns of coercion. The judge nodded. Proceed. Linda clicked a small device, and suddenly the speakers carried Brent's voice into the room. If Verlaine ever disputes this letter, this recording is my truth, his voice said, measured, calm, tired but resolute. I asked Kaylin to remain in the home. She was the only one who never tried to profit from my illness. The words cut through the room like a scalpel. A gasp echoed from someone in the back. Verlaine shifted stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her lawyer's fingers twitched slightly, a tell I didn't miss. The judge leaned in, listening carefully, not even blinking. The audio stopped. Silence followed, thick with implication. Linda handed a folder to the clerk. We also submit the original handwritten letter, dated and notarized, found with Mr. Hawthorne's final documents and recorded message. It includes detailed instructions for transfer of the property and trust, as well as this statement which I'll read aloud. She cleared her throat and looked at me for permission. I gave a small nod. My mother threatened to withhold care if I didn't sign the joint deed. I pretended to comply. A murmur rose in the courtroom. The judge raised his hand. Order. My heart didn't pound. It didn't race. It felt steady. That was the strange part. The truth was finally on the table, and I didn't feel triumphant or smug, just anchored. Verlaine's attorney stood. We request to cross-examine. The judge nodded. Ms. Verlaine Hawthorne, please approach the stand. She walked with practiced grace, spine stiff as steel, swore in, sat down, and folded her hands like she had nothing to hide. The attorney began with soft questions, her relationship with her son, the home, the care she claimed to provide. Then he shifted. Ms. Hawthorne, can you clarify the financial transactions made on January 7th of last year, particularly the withdrawal of $12,000 and its destination? She blinked. That was for medical equipment. At least, we were planning or executing? She faltered. Executing. You also said in your deposition that Brent was the one who initiated those payments. Yes, he asked me to. Despite medical records showing he was heavily sedated on that day? A pause. A long, dangerous pause. I must have gotten the date wrong. Her lawyer requested a recess. The judge frowned. 15 minutes. Verlaine stepped down from the stand with her chin lifted, but her shoulders had dropped. A slight slump that no one else might notice, but I did. For once, she wasn't in control. When court resumed, the judge addressed the room. In light of today's evidence and testimony, I am issuing a temporary order to freeze the Hawthorne estate until the probate process concludes. The home in question shall remain under Kaylin Hawthorne's possession until further notice. Furthermore, we are initiating an independent review for potential elder coercion. Verlaine shot up from her chair. You can't be serious. The judge didn't flinch. Sit down, Ms. Hawthorne, or you'll be held in contempt. She stormed out instead. Her heels hit the floor like gunshots as the door slammed behind her. I didn't smile. I didn't look back. I just stood, gathered the papers Linda handed me, and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Outside the courthouse, the sky was a soft gray, neither gloomy nor bright, just still. Linda touched my arm. "You did well." I nodded. My throat was too tight for words. That evening, as the wind rolled through the garden Brent once planted with his bare hands, I walked into our bedroom. The quiet hummed around me. I stood at the closet, reached behind his suits, and pressed on the back panel. It gave way with a soft click. Behind it was the safe. He had built it there years ago, back when we were younger and believed in preparing for the unknown. I had almost forgotten. I opened it slowly, unsure what I'd find. Inside was a sealed envelope and a single key. The letter was addressed in his handwriting. I sat down on the edge of our bed, the envelope trembling in my fingers. I hadn't cried in weeks, not since the funeral, not when Verlaine sneered, not even in court. But when I opened that envelope and saw what he'd written, something inside me broke open. That evening, after the courtroom had emptied and my heels finally found the comfort of familiar ground, I stepped out into the backyard. The sky had softened into a pale lavender, the air calm and heavy with the scent of blooming peonies. The wind rolled low through the branches of the trees he'd planted with his own hands. There were 3 oaks. He'd named them for his brothers, and they stood tall, like quiet witnesses. I wrapped myself in his old sweater, the navy one with worn cuffs and a frayed collar. It still held a faint trace of cedar and aftershave. For the first time since the funeral, I sat down, not because I was exhausted, but because I wanted to stay. The bench beneath me had once been raw, unfinished wood. He'd meant to sand it, stain it, but even in its imperfection, it had held us through summer evenings and whispered arguments and soft laughter. Tonight, it held only me. The cicadas hummed like background static. Somewhere across the fence, a child giggled, chasing fireflies. It all felt real again. Inside, I climbed the stairs slowly, pausing briefly in the hallway where his pictures still hung. I ran my hand along the wall, stopping at the one framed sketch he'd drawn of our garden. Then I entered our bedroom. It still smelled like him, like paper and soil and a little bit of spearmint from his favorite gum. I closed the door gently behind me and crossed to the far wall. Behind the landscape painting of Lake Tahoe, our first road trip together, was the safe he'd installed when his health began to decline. I remember asking, "What are you planning for? A treasure map?" He had only smiled and said, "Just peace of mind, babe." The lock clicked open on the 3rd try. Inside was a velvet envelope, black, thick, and aged at the corners. I reached for it with a stillness I hadn't felt in months. Not fear, not anticipation, just reverence. Inside the envelope were 3 things. First, a photograph, slightly faded, of us standing barefoot on a beach in South Carolina. I was wearing his hoodie. He was sunburned and grinning, holding a crab like a trophy. He'd written on the back, "We had sand in our shoes for weeks. Worth it." Second, a handwritten card. Not typed, not dictated, just him. "If you're reading this, you made it through hell, but I knew you would. I wish I could have shielded you better. This house was always yours. They just couldn't stand that I loved you more than I feared them." Lastly, a legal deed, already filed, already signed. The house, fully and irrevocably in my name, filed 6 months before his mother ever showed up with that joint deed stunt. He must have known they'd try something, and he made sure they'd fail. I pressed the envelope to my chest and sat on the edge of our bed. No tears came, just the fullness of knowing he had thought of everything, even after everything. The phone rang just past 10 p.m. I almost didn't answer, but something told me it was time to face the last ember of that fire. "Kaylin." Verlaine's voice slithered through the receiver, shaky, frantic. "Do you know what you've done?" I didn't reply. "They've frozen the accounts. My name's being dragged into investigations. My own cousins are calling me a manipulator. Do you know what it's like to have your entire family turn on you?" "Nah." I listened. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just a place to hurl her panic. "You always wanted to turn him against us," she hissed. "You were never one of us." My voice was calm, measured. You should have grieved your son, Verlaine, not plotted against his widow. Then I hung up. I sat in silence for a long while. I could have done more. I had the right, legally, to have her nursing cooperative share revoked. She'd forged influence, lied under oath, manipulated a grieving family. But when I brought up the paperwork the next morning, something stopped me. Let her rot in her own bitterness, I thought. Instead, I mailed a donation check to the Widowed Women's Legal Defense Fund. I signed it in his name. Quiet justice, not courtroom revenge. 2 weeks later, the neighborhood kids started trickling in for the summer reading event I posted on the local board. Just like he'd talked about, he'd always wanted the garden to be more than a sanctuary for us. He wanted it to be a space for others to grow too. I repainted the bench. This time, I had it engraved. Love is quiet, but it remembers everything. I watched the kids run across the grass, books in hand, crumbs of cookies trailing behind them. The sunlight danced across the roses he'd planted. His spirit, his truest legacy, wasn't in the court documents or property lines. It was here. It was this. Later that evening, as twilight settled in and the last of the children had been picked up by their parents, I made myself a cup of chamomile and stepped back outside. I settled on the bench and closed my eyes. He wasn't gone. Not really, because I hadn't screamed. I hadn't burned it all down. I'd simply outlasted the storm. I'd kept our love whole, and in doing so, I'd won. Have you ever been betrayed in your most fragile moment, then stood up quietly and won anyway? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.